Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar Weekly Discussion Topic video. This one's going to be part 3 of my series covering the best bender fighters in Avatar. So we've already done water, we've already done air, and last time out we did fire. So today we're going to finish it up with earthbending. So we're going to create the earthbending shortlist ahead of, obviously, the final compiling of the shortlist into a top 20 list at the end. And then we'll address, at the end of this video, I'll address how I'm going to approach doing the video, how I'm going to include the avatars and so on. But we're going to start off with the earthbenders here. So let's immediately run down our shortlist here ahead of our kind of who we're going to basically decide is moving into consideration for the end 20 list. So we've got Toph, Xinfu, the Boulder, Tyro, Bolin, Wei Wing, Su Yin, Lin, Kuvira, Gazan, Bumi, Sud, Longfeng, Hundun, and Aiwei. So pretty interesting list. ATLA characters, Avatar characters, even a video game character. So who immediately drops off? This is a pretty long short list. Who are the characters who immediately kind of fall off this thing straight away? For me, I think Aiwei kind of falls off very early on. You know, he's a Red Lotus member, so that makes him somewhat notable. But outside of one or two applications of his bending, we don't really know how strong this character truly is. He must be quite good to be a Red Lotus member, but what else can you really say about that? He has earthbending, metal bending, and I suppose you can assume he uses seismic sense as well. That's how he detects lies, so that makes him notable. But in terms of a combat situation, he doesn't really seem like that sort of character necessarily. He seems like an interesting, unique support character who uses his bending for kind of different things. But he obviously is able to use it to some degree to fight, but I don't think it's anywhere to the point where we should really consider him going forward on the list. I suppose we can also get rid of Tyro at this point. This is Haru's father. I basically included him ahead of Haru because I don't think Haru has any amazing feats to his name, but Tyro seems like a very, very solid earthbender. But again, I don't think there's anything inherently standout about this guy. He's strong, powerful, seems to have good experience. I just don't think he's that great. So we'll note him here and move on. So Tyro falls off the list as well. After that, I think we're looking at characters like Xinfu and the Boulder. So these are our kind of two Earth Rumble representatives. We have the kind of leader of the overall thing, and then the Boulder, who probably represents one of the better fighters of the main kind of performers. I would slightly rate the Boulder as being better than Xinfu, even if I think Xinfu is kind of positioned within the series as being meant to be better than him. I think the Boulder, just to me, the fact that he participated in the Day of Black Sun invasion with our heroes speaks to the fact that he is more of a combat kind of focused character, whereas Xinfu has kind of bounty hunter skills and uses his bending quite well. I think the Boulder I would strike me as an overall better bender. Xinfu maybe is a more stylish character, whereas the Boulder is a more kind of strong earthbender style, but I think they're roughly similarly powered, but again, I don't think stand up really too well on the list against the other characters. But again, very powerful benders, so we'll note them here and again move on. So that leaves us with Toph, Bolin, Wei Wing, Su Yin, Lin, Kuvira, Gazan, Bumi, Sud, Longfeng, and Hundun. I think we'll drop Sud off as well. I think for similar reasons as the Boulder and Xinfu and Tyro to a degree. This is Roku's earthbending teacher, for anyone who's unaware of who Sud is. He effectively is the character who's the earth character from the intro to Avatar. You have the fire, earth, air, water bit, and it's Azula is one of the characters and so on. Sud is the earth guy there. So with him, I think he very much is like the quintessential like master Earthbender. I would call him that, because obviously he thought Roku, and Roku's a good Earthbender himself, so he must be like pretty skilled. So that's why I would note Zinfu as being a very strong character. Not Zinfu, what am I talking about? That's why I would note Sud as being a notably strong character, but nothing really more than that. Purely because we don't see him fight. He's probably, perhaps, if we got to know him better, he probably would maybe make the list, maybe towards the end. But for now, we don't know enough about him, so he drops off. Long Feng, I think, is up next for consideration. I think he's meant to be, one of the more powerful Dai Li agent type characters, but you sort of do question, like, is he the leader of the Dai Li because of his power, or is it for his leadership skills, organization skills, and just that sort of political leader mind that he has? We know he's a skilled Earthbender. Like, the way he captures Appa by making the like ground kind of swivel the way he does is very impressive. The one-hit kill attack on Jet was very impressive, but that's about it for his like bending skills. We don't know if this guy in a one-on-one fight can like flip all over the place, stunning earthbending moves and stuff like that. He has the Dai Li to defend him, and to me that maybe suggests that his skills, if he has good combat skills, are perhaps a little rusty, relying on other people, and doesn't feel the need to use them that much. So that's the only thing that would hold me back from like noting him too highly on the list. So we'll drop Long Feng off at that point in time. Hundun, I think, is the next one. I really don't know what to do with Hundun as a character, because this is a combination of Hundun and his brother, because they're conjoined twins, and I think the implication is that they're both Earthbenders. So they're clearly skilled based on what the little we see in the game. They're characters who not only have earthbending skills, but also have like spiritual skills with the chaotic attack kind of spiritual kind of technique as well. So they are notably powerful characters. It's just like, how do we really position these guys? Because in the past, we know that they are notable enough to be the enemies of an avatar and have a big showdown with an avatar, which basically resulted in the more or less death of Hundun's conjoined brother, and injuring Hundun to the point where they had to retreat into the spirit world. So they weren't as powerful as one of the past avatars, but what does that really say? Like, was the avatar injured in their fight? We don't really know enough. And then I don't really know if it's fair to judge Hundun, the boss at the end of the core video game, versus the other characters on this list, because because at that point Hundun is primarily a spiritual character who uses like spirit attacks in addition to little bits of earthbending. So I'm gonna make a note here of just kind of like, realistically, he probably is a really powerful character, but purely for some of the vagueness around the video game, and just like, should I include his like his chaotic attack thing, which doesn't really seem to be a bending technique. Admittedly, it's something he would have, but like, are we really including that all that much? I'm not sure. In the comments, if you're familiar with the Hundun character in the core video game, let me know what your thoughts are. I may, like, if you guys like watching this feel that Hundun is actually powerful enough to be very notable, probably slot him in when it comes to actually compiling the list at the end. For now, I'm just gonna leave him kind of aside. I'm not like placing him at number whatever it is at this stage, 9 or something like that on the list. I'm just kind of putting him aside as like, I honestly don't really know what to do with the character. Just because of the vagueness of like chaotic attack and what exactly sort of techniques that is. Because the implication is really that like, by the time Hundun is back in play, he's basically a spirit because he's been in the spirit world for so long. So I think I'm just going to leave him off the list. I really don't think he, as a bender, really is in play here all that much. Because I think most of his threat as a character comes from the fact that he is kind of more of a spiritual type character later on, as a spirit basically. So that's that. And then I think we get into the kind of somewhat best of the best, but I think we have to drop Wayne Wing off the list at this point. We dropped them off at the exact same time. I don't think there's any way you can place one above the other. They're identical to the point of just like very few people within the fandom can like separate them in terms of which one's which. They're both skilled metal and earthbenders. They're the more combat focused members of Su Yin's family. They go into battle with their mom when she gets into fights, and that speaks to the fact that they are the ones who are training more in terms of combat situations and are notable. We know that at least both of them are on the level of like they can spar with Bolin and be on par. They are at the stage where like when it comes to like sparring in like metal earthbending to a degree with Korra, they're sort of on par. So you would call them like roughly master level earthbenders and metal benders, and that makes them very notable. I just don't feel we should really include them in the discussion from this point on, because I don't think they stand out beyond just that. So at this point is where I'm going to call it, that like I think these remaining 7 characters are the ones that are going to be in consideration for the list at the end. This is our 7 shortlist for the Earthbenders finalized. Everyone else has dropped off at this point. These are the 7 left. So completely out of order, it's Toph, Bolin, Su, Lin, Kuvira, Gazan, and Bumi. And as is often the case, it's easier to do the top of the list than the bottom, so we'll immediately put Toph as number 1. And I will straight away say that I think Toph, in terms of like her combat level as a character, is probably one of the most overrated characters in the Avatar universe, but that's only because people absolutely like freak out about how powerful she is. She's exceptionally powerful, and I think she absolutely is justified as being the number 1 on this list. I think we'll discuss it a little bit more in terms of the consideration for the final top 20 benders, where her level is. But in terms of an earthbender, she absolutely is number 1. The only character who comes close is Bumi, as we'll get into. But even then, the fact that 12-year-old Toph, maybe 13-year-old Toph at the time, can basically have a sparring match with Bumi and then fight to a draw when there's 100 years of experience, and you can't put it against Bumi that like, oh, he's so old, he tired out in that fight or anything like that. Bumi has not really demonstrated that he has like stamina problems when he fights because of his age. He seems to be basically as good as anyone at this stage, and just the sheer experience he has with earthbending. Sure, he doesn't have some of the special techniques that Toph has, but just his raw earthbending skill with the rock of earthbending is just amazing, and the fact that she at 12 years old could kind of basically match him speaks to the fact that she right now is probably like joint first with Bumi, but I think where she is in the comics now, having developed a little bit, and then I think where she gets to when she's in her mid to late 20s, early 30s as a bender, that is Toph at like her absolute peak level. And I think in terms of the earthbending side of things, no one actually comes close to her. So Toph at this point in time, I think, is justified for just about getting the number 1 spot, but absolutely in the future just owns that spot completely, and I don't think there's any real debate. So number 2 on the list, I'm going to give it to Bumi over all the other characters on the list, because again, the fact is like Toph is most notably, very clearly, one of the most obvious choices for the number 1 spot on the list, and the fact that Bumi has fought her to a draw at one point, even if it was more of a fun sparring match, is very telling. He is one of our most notable earthbenders in the show. He is the old master of earthbending as part of the Order of the White Lotus. He was, I think the fact that he told Aang to find someone who thought him in a correct way, and then it wasn't him, speaks to the fact that, you know, someone like Toph is perhaps more suited in some ways to be better than him. But I think that's potentially Bumi undervaluing his own skills, and I think he is still utterly brilliant. The fact that this is a guy who can basically like go in and like be amazingly powerful in the Day of Black's the big finale battle at the end with the other Order of the White Lotus people, can kind of break out more or less like at will. Like he just chooses like, oh, eclipse time, I'll break out at this point in time, and just demolishes everyone. The way he takes back Omashu, I think, is just so powerful. What he does, admittedly, he's going up against people who don't have the firebending anymore, but still, the level of the earthbending stuff that he does there to like single-handedly take on that many like non-benders who have good martial arts training as firebenders is, I still think, extremely telling. His fight with Aang shows that he can handle more kind of tricky fighters who are like agile and have an advantage. He just, to me, is a very complete bender, and it's just the sheer fact that, like, I think Toph having metal bending, seismic sense, gives her the number one spot. And again, I think it speaks to like how easy it is to decide the top of this list by the fact that with Toph, I don't really need to go in depth in terms of like what skills she has and doesn't have. I think it's just so obvious why she is in that spot. The only thing that I suppose goes against her, which will be discussed much more in future videos, is she, surprisingly enough, isn't involved in like that many like one-on-one fights. She's often shown basically as the character who is just demolishing tons of like random grunt characters. She hasn't really been shown to like just in one-on-one like amazing fights been to just destroy people. She destroys most of like the boulder type characters on this list, the strong to very good earthbenders very easily in one-on-one fights. But like she holds her own against like the best, but I don't really. She doesn't have a ton of like amazing like one-on-one fight wins. Like say a Mako very clearly has a lot of good victories in bending fights and so on. Toph, the only thing that potentially holds her back is kind of like a Sammy on the non-bender list. She's primarily fighting the random guys, doing exceptionally well, showing her skill, but maybe is held back by that. But still, number 1 Toph, number 2 Boomy, and I don't think there's much debate there at all. The struggle is, I think, for the most part, figuring out the last couple of spots, because I think a lot of these characters are very, very, very even in terms of how you do this. And this is one of the first times where, like, even as I'm recording this, usually I have the end list decided, and it's just kind of prior to recording the video, just deciding on the best way to actually in the video go through it so that it flows well. This one I still haven't really decided on my ordering for these characters at the end. I think the easiest thing to do is to say is to kind of separate the key characters and kind of decide who's better than who, and kind of roughly decide on our who's better than who, like who comes out lower on the list type thing. So I think it's fair to say that we have to place Su, Lin, and Bolin below Kuvira and Ghazan. Now that's not the order for either of those two groups, but we're separating those two groups in that from here on out the discussion is about for the number 3 and 4 slots, is it Kuvira or Ghazan ahead of one another? And then for the 5, 6, and 7 slots, is Bolin better than Su and Lin? Which of the sisters is better? Does Bolin split the sisters? And so on. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Because I think in the show it's presented that Bolin was not better than Ghazan. And then you have to kind of think about, like, would Book 4 Bolin have beat Ghazan? And I still don't really think so, because I struggle to really think about, like, how much has Bolin perfected lava bending in the couple of years since that fight with Ghazan? And I'm not sure if it has, and I'm not sure if he uses lava bending in the most effective way, given his personality traits as a character. So I would very clearly put Bolin below Ghazan, even though Bolin is amazing. I'd put him below Kuvira because I think Kuvira is very much meant to be established as one of the best, that she is almost in the kind of Toph Boomy bracket as a character. I just wouldn't quite place her in the same echelon as Toph and Boomy, but I think she is meant to be ahead of Su and Lin. In terms of Su, Lin, and Kuvira, I think all have very similar kind of traits to them. They're all good earthbenders, they're all good metal benders, but they emphasize using their metal bending a little bit more. And I think Kuvira is meant to be the best of that group, because Toph specifically states about her daughters that though both Sue and Lin are not as powerful as she is, that kind of compared to Toph comparing them to herself, it's not really that close. That you'd think her daughters would be just as powerful as she is, but there is a gulf in class between the likes of a Toph and a Sue and Lin. So that needs to be talked about. So we still have to figure out what exactly the placements are here. And again, like the whole Ozai, Mako, Zuko section from the firebending video, this is the tough section of this video. How do I place these 5 characters in their individual groups ahead of each other or not? So I think we'll tackle the duo first, Kuvira and Ghazan. Who's better than who? So with these two, it's a kind of difficult one. I think all of the places left are difficult, but these two I just feel are kind of roughly the same power level, but because of different reasons. I think their matchup is very, very unique and interesting in that, like, Kuvira is not exactly like a power bender as such. When she uses earthbending, it's more subtle uses of earthbending. Her entire use of metal bending is kind of more small little bits of metal bending, and kind of wearing her opponents down through clever use and clever attack patterns and stuff like that. We really rarely see Kuvira use big attacks, and she definitely emphasizes the use of her metal bending over her earth bending. Though you wouldn't say that she doesn't. You never say with Kuvira that she like rarely uses earth bending, but it's definitely like a secondary thing for her, whereas metal is the primary thing. Whereas Ghazan is more of a power bender. When the earth bends, he does do bigger kind of earth bending attacks. He can block, but he's not exactly the most defensive earthbender. I think from what we've seen of him when he does his normal earthbending, his normal earthbending is kind of, it's good, it's powerful, but it's quite basic. He definitely relies on his lava bending for his kind of main attacking, and then lava bending, for me at least, doesn't have a ton of defensive uses. So when he is on the defensive, when you do put Ghazan on the defensive, I think it is possible to break through his earthbending defenses, as we saw when Mako joined the fight again with Bolin against Ghazan. That fight went downhill very quickly for Ghazan once Mako joined the battle. He was kind of overwhelmed by the two of them attacking him, and he couldn't hold his defensive up that much. Admittedly, that was 2-on-1, and admittedly because I think Bolin at that point was kind of very unused to having two different forms of bending to use with lava and earth, so Ghazan had an advantage just against Bolin on his own and was never really held on the defensive. But I still, as like one of the few kind of times that Ghazan's defenses were tested, that he was really like challenged, like kind of in a way by another bender when Mako joined that fight. I think it speaks to that maybe there is a weakness of Ghazan with regards to his kind of defensive abilities. With Kuvira, you perhaps say if there's any weakness to her, it's that her offense, while good, isn't like stunning. Like it's not like we haven't seen her use the power attacks. And so this matchup is like, basically, to me, comes down to like, does Kuvira get her quick attacks in, the little metal bands to like grab Ghazan's arms and stuff like that? Does she get those attacks in first, or does Ghazan get his big lava bending attacks in? I think it's all about, with those two, which of those things happens first. And I suppose as well as that, it's about how does Ghazan handle fighting a metal bender, and how does Kuvira tackle someone with lava? I think a lot of it depends on how much metal there actually is around. If there's a lot of metal, then you probably give the advantage to Kuvira. If there's not a lot of metal, then you probably give the advantage to Ghazan, because he probably has access to a lot of earth, depending on where he is, and can, overwhelm with the amount of kind of lava that he can create. I suppose at this point we will discuss lava bending a bit. If I'd recorded this video a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a couple of months ago, I probably would have been a little critical of lava bending. I probably would have said stuff like, it's it's too much of a double-edged sword. You're at just as much risk of hurting yourself with it as you are other people. It's super destructive, but it's also such a risk. I think what we have seen with Ghazan, I rewatched a lot of his fights in preparation for this video. He uses it so well that he rarely actually puts himself in danger. Like, it never looks like he's about to hurt himself with his lava bending. Yes, it looks like he sort of goes a bit out of control and potentially, like, you know, he puts himself at risk by virtue of like injuring the structural integrity of the area that he's in. And then, like, maybe when he's put on the defensive, he goes a bit overboard with it and risks actually injuring himself. But I think that's more down to Ghazan's personality when he is under pressure, as opposed to necessarily the technique itself. I think he can use it super effectively, controlled to a degree. So it's all about, like, would Kuvira push Ghazan to the point where he would have to kind of go overboard with lava bending? And that's where I'm kind of, like, unsure about, in that I think Kuvira is agile enough to kind of stay away from Ghazan for a lot of the fight, but does she necessarily have the power to burst through the lowish defenses that he has? Would she be able to kind of mount her kind of quick combo attacks with metal and little bits of earth before Ghazan can get those attacks in? That's what I'm not entirely sure about with these two. I think they're both excellent and they're very, very evenly matched, but I don't really know right now kind of what way I should actually go with this. As I said at the start, my initial take was that, like, Kuvira by a little bit, but I also at the same time feel that, like, Ghazan could counter metalbend, because you're not guaranteed that you're going to fight with, like, tons of metal with access to. And I think potentially what happens in this fight is that it comes down to, like, maybe that their metal and lava are equal. So it comes down to potentially who is the better normal earthbender. And you would probably say, based on what we see, that Ghazan's style is more like most other earthbenders that we see. And even though Kuvira doesn't necessarily have the magnitude of earthbending that we see from other characters, she uses it very effectively. So again, it comes down to this kind of stylistic thing between the two. Of, like, Ghazan's earthbending seems more powerful, but Kuvira's, like, technical approach seems a little bit more kind of apt. She seems the more kind of intelligent one in battle. So I'm very, very conflicted with this. Definitely in the comments, let me know on this one if you feel it should go either way, or let me know. Right now, I'm probably going to give it to Kuvira just because of the mindset situation. I think Ghazan can be a little bit of a liability to himself, primarily just because of the way he ended up being defeated. That the second he was put under a bit of pressure, I felt like his defenses crumbled a bit. And then when he was really put under pressure against the two of them, he kind of just went for the kind of the suicide move of just take down the cave, take everyone with me. And I think that isn't the most kind of healthy battle style to really have. So, purely down to kind of, I suppose, mentality, potentially intelligence in battle, I'm going to give Kuvira the edge, even though I feel that their powers ultimately are actually quite similar. So Kuvira number 3, number 4 Ghazan. And then we have another trio of characters that is also very difficult to place. Su, Lin, and Bolin. This is a very difficult one to do. I think the immediate thing to do is to compare the sisters and, I suppose, explain potentially why Kuvira is ahead of both of them. I think Lin, Su, and Kuvira all have relatively similar styles of fighting with regards to primarily emphasizing metal bending and then adding in earth bending a bit more. Lin, you would perhaps say, uses earth bending a bit more than the other two, and probably has a bit more of a style that emphasizes the kind of power, the strength, the kind of big attacks of earth bending rather than the other two. I think Su and Kuvira actually have very similar styles, but I think just based on the fact that Su and Kuvira did have a one-on-one fight and Kuvira got the edge, you have to place Kuvira above Su. So there's that. I would place Su above Lin because I do think based on the little fight that they had, even though you can question Lin's kind of mental state in that fight with regards to like she seemed somewhat drained from the emotional experience she was just gone through, and physically maybe wasn't in the right situation, but she was doing a lot of powerful attacks, and the fight was relatively even until Sue got the advantage. I still ultimately would say Sue has the slight edge, because she like Kuvira is more of a kind of technical fighter, maybe doesn't emphasize power as much, but I feel she actually has a pretty good balance, I think, between being able to use the kind of subtle attacks like Kuvira, but also being able to do powerful attacks like Lin when she needs to. And so that's why I'd say Sue is actually above Lin. So with that sorted, it's all about basically, do we say that where do we put Bolin with regards to the two sisters? Does Bolin go ahead of both of them? Go in between Sue and Lin as like the number 6 slot? Or does Bolin come bottom? It's interesting, because talking about Bolin is so interesting, because he's the character who very clearly develops the most as a fighter within the series. He starts out being a very good pro bender and a solid bender, but not really having a lot of good combat applications, because his mentality seems quite almost scared when he fights, as shown when he didn't even try to defend himself against Amon up on stage. But like by the end of book 2, he has proven himself and is like a hero to the people of Republic City, because he saves Raiko when he's about to be kidnapped, and he does that very effectively with some really impressive bending. Becomes a hero. In book 3, I think he really develops in terms of his combat abilities to the point where he is able to a degree, like challenge Ghazan and not just instantly lose that fight. I think he's struggling by the time just before Mako enters the fight, Bolin against Ghazan, and that's why I place Bolin below Ghazan. But I still think it speaks to how powerful he is that he could challenge Ghazan on that level and not just lose instantly. That he in a very short space of time was able to use lava bending in a way where he could counter Ghazan's lava for the most part and stay in the fight. And then his, I think, arguably like Bolin's better application of normal earthbending also kept him in, along with maybe better agility. So there's that. And then in book 4, I think it's really interesting in that, like, I think you have to say his military experience working alongside like Kuvira and the Earth Empire gave him a little bit more discipline. He's had 2 years by the time of book 4 to kind of perfect and master elements of his lava bending. And even though I think Bolin and lava bending, like, they're very contradictory things. Like, Bolin's personality doesn't seem like he's the character who could use lava bending all that effectively, because it is so destructive. But I think because he is aware of how destructive it is, he actually has such great control over it that he wouldn't have potentially some of the problems that Ghazan has with the technique, where he would let it go out of control, where he could potentially destroy the area he's in. I think Bolin would be very kind of careful and intelligently use lava bending in a way where he wouldn't destroy whatever area he's fighting in if there was a delicate situation. So I think that means that he wouldn't go as power heavy with the lava bending, but he would have more kind of subtle and I think clever uses to use the fact that it is such a rare and powerful ability, but use it effectively and sparingly in battle. And I think that gives him an edge against the sisters in a sense, in that I think they are obviously much more experienced characters than Bolin, purely because of their age, and of course they have like training from their mother, Toph. That's something that you need to kind of keep in mind as well. But Bolin is an athlete as well. He has that pro bending style as well. He can do a more kind of athletic, kind of gymnastic earthbending style, where it more emphasizes kind of speed over power, which is what you usually associate with earthbending. Boomy style, basically. But I think Bolin can revert to doing more powerful attacks when he needs to, but is also able to do the really fast-paced styles as well, whereas I think Sue and Lin are more kind of locked into their style, whereas Bolin, I think, has a more kind of flowing style that can go back and forth between them, and he can also has a versatility to add in lava bending when he needs to. So how does he actually compare against the sisters? Lynn obviously is the one I'm ranking lower of the sisters. So how does he actually compare about Lynn? Is he going to jump ahead of her? I think their earthbending is probably like, maybe not on par, but I think Bolin's earthbending skills keep him in the fight against Lynn just on the basis of standard earthbending. I don't think she has such an experience advantage that she would be able to just dominate Bolin. I think his agility and kind of at times clever use of earthbending, subtle uses of earthbending, accurate uses of it would kind of frustrate Lynn to a degree, who would employ a more kind of power focused style, kind of like her mother. And then it would come down to, how does Bolin deal with metal bending, and how would Lynn deal with lava bending? And I think that's an interesting one, because obviously Lynn has a more direct style, a more simplistic style. She is technical to a degree with her bending, but it's not like super clever to the same degree that like Sue's bending at times can be. She is much more direct and more represents a earth and metal bender who has the kind of the very basic earth philosophy on things. So I think Bolin has an edge in terms of the variety of kind of techniques he would employ. And then I think just the fact that lava bending in many ways is this ability that kind of locks off area of the battlefield against your opponent, that if you put lava in one way, you force your opponent to retreat somewhere else. And I think Bolin having the athleticism advantage, even though like Lynn could use her metal hooks to kind of traverse a little bit quicker, Bolin I think is quick and can obviously use kind of earth kind of pillars to rocket himself across areas very quickly as well. So I think he has a slight edge in that front, and because he'd be able to lead the battlefield because he's the one using lava bending, I think he could force Lynn into a situation where he could perhaps get the advantage on her. And I think Book 4 Bolin getting much closer to his prime is actually a challenge for Bolin, for Lynn, and I think he actually takes it. I think Bolin I'm going to place above Lynn, because I think he has the power level with lava bending, even though he's not the most powerful user of lava bending. I think he has the potential to be much better, but right now I think he can use it effectively enough where he can take advantage of the fact that it's a very rare technique. And in his normal earth bending, I think is so useful, and he uses it well enough that he would have the slight advantage over Lynn. And it is slight. It's very, very close between these two, but I think it is a fight that Bolin ultimately takes. In regards to Sue and Bolin, I do think Sue has a slight advantage here. I think because Sue would probably be the more agile of the sisters, and because she has a more technical style, I think she balances, like as I said, Kuvira and Lynn's style quite well, and so I think would handle Bolin a little better. I think Bolin pushes her close, and overall 5, 6, and 7, the spots are all very, very close. But I'm going to, for now, keep Bolin below Sue. Though I will say that I think Bolin's potential as a character, when he reaches his prime in his like mid to late 20s going into 30s, is probably that he surpasses Gazan and is on the level of Kuvira, like potentially becomes like the third best earthbender we've ever seen. If he learns to properly master lava bending, having many years more experience using it, I think he can get to the stage where he potentially could be number 3. And then we have the idea that potentially, based on what Su Yin says, that he realistically could learn metal bending if he wanted to. Will he do that? I don't think you can really say for sure, but I think he has the potential to be potentially number 3 on this list. But for now, we'll leave him at 6. So that's the earthbending list. So, number 1, Toph. Number 2, Boomy. Number 3, Kuvira. Number 4, Gazan. Number 5, Su Yin. Number 6, Bolin. And number 7, Lin Beifong. So, we're going to end the video there, and then next time out, we'll do the final compiling everything into our top 20 list. We'll bring the avatars into play, and we'll finish off this series and find our proper top bender power rankings list. So yeah, that's been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.